Angela had imagined her wedding night 1,000 times. A night of passion, love, and the beginning of forever with Daniel, the man she adored. But never, not even in her wildest nightmares, had she envisioned what actually happened. The reception was nothing short of magical. Laughter echoed, champagne flowed, and the dance floor pulsed with energy. Angela had never seen Daniel and his twin brother, David, so alive. The two were inseparable as they celebrated, raising their glasses, dancing with guests, and stealing moments of drunken mischief. Angela had indulged, too. The cocktails were sweet, and the warmth of alcohol dulled her senses, making everything feel hazy but euphoric. She moved through the night like a dream, wrapped in love and excitement, waiting for that final, sacred moment with her new husband. But as the night wore on, Daniel became preoccupied, ensuring the guests were settled, handling a few last-minute hotel arrangements, and checking on his mother, who had felt faint from all the excitement. Meanwhile, David, equally drunk, wandered upstairs. Angela barely remembered walking up to the honeymoon suite. Her heart fluttered as she slipped into her delicate white lace lingerie, the silk straps sliding over her shoulders. She ran her fingers through her hair, staring at her reflection in the mirror. A gentle knock sounded at the door. She knew it was him. Excitement surged through her veins as she padded across the room. Her body tingled with anticipation, her mind slightly clouded from the alcohol. She swung the door open, the dim hallway light casting a golden glow around the figure standing before her. Tall, strong, familiar. Her breath hitched. The scent of cologne mixed with the faint musk of alcohol filled her senses. His eyes, dark with something unspoken, scanned her body, lingering on the curve of her waist, the swell of her breasts beneath the thin fabric. "Daniel," she whispered, biting her lip, his pupils dilated. A slow smirk played on his lips, and then he stepped inside. The door clicked shut. There was no hesitation. The moment his hands touched her, a fire ignited. Angela gasped as his lips crashed against hers. The heat of his body pressed against her, strong hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. She melted into him, moaning softly as his tongue traced the seam of her lips before slipping inside. His kiss was desperate, hungry, like a man starved. Fingers tangled in hair. Bodies stumbled backward. She felt his hands roam, rough and possessive, leaving a trail of fire against her skin. A thrill shot through her as he grabbed her thighs, hoisting her up. Instinctively, she wrapped her legs around his waist, her back pressing against the cool wall. His lips traveled lower, down her neck, sucking gently before nipping at her sensitive flesh. She gasped, tilting her head back, exposing more of herself to him. "God, I've wanted you all night," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with lust. Angela trembled. The alcohol blurred her thoughts, but her body knew only one thing: desire. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, desperate to feel him. He groaned as she slid the fabric off his shoulders, raking her nails down his bare chest. Before she could take another breath, he carried her to the bed, laying her down gently before climbing over her. The world spun. Lace slipped away. Skin met skin. She moaned as his lips found her collarbone, then lower, leaving a trail of heat in their wake. Every touch sent shivers down her spine. She arched beneath him, craving more. His hand traced slow, tantalizing circles along her inner thigh before finally slipping between them, finding her aching center. She gasped, "Daniel!" deep growl rumbled from his chest. There was no stopping now. As he moved above her, their bodies molding together in perfect rhythm, she surrendered completely, lost in the pleasure, lost in him. Her fingers dug into his back as he thrust deeper, sending waves of ecstasy crashing through her. The world outside faded. There was only this moment, this heat, this passion, and then bliss. Their bodies trembled, tangled in the sheets, as they finally collapsed in breathless satisfaction. A long silence stretched between them, punctuated only by their slowing breaths. Angela curled into him, her body still tingling from the intensity of their union. "I love you," she whispered sleepily. He said nothing, only pulled her closer, and in her drunken haze, she didn't question it. Hours later, a knock at the door stirred her from sleep. Angela blinked, her mind groggy, body sore in the most delicious way. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, as the door creaked open. Daniel walked in. A tired but affectionate smile spread across his face. "Babe, I'm so sorry," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I wanted last night to be perfect, but everything got so crazy. I barely made it back." Angela's blood turned to ice. Her breath hitched, her stomach clenched. "I hope you're not too disappointed that we didn't, make love last night," Daniel added with a sheepish grin, sitting beside her. "I was exhausted. I just wanted to hold you." The room spun. She felt the sheets against her bare skin, the soreness between her thighs, the lingering scent of sweat and sex in the air. No, this couldn't be happening. She looked at Daniel, her real husband, sitting before her, completely oblivious. If he hadn't touched her last night, then who had? Angela's breath came in shallow gasps as the horrifying realization clawed its way into her mind. David. She had slept with David, Daniel's twin brother, her brother-in-law. A wave of nausea hit her. The memories, the passion, the pleasure, the whispered words. All of it had been a mistake. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her vision blurred. Daniel reached for her hand, but she flinched. "Angela?" His brows furrowed in concern. "What's wrong?" What was she supposed to say? How could she even begin to explain? Would she confess and shatter her marriage before it even began? Or take this secret to the grave and live with the guilt forever? Angela swallowed hard, blinking back tears. One night, one drunken mistake, and now her entire life was hanging by a thread. Angela's heart pounded in her chest as she sat frozen in bed. Daniel's warm hand rested on hers, his eyes filled with concern. "I hope you're not too disappointed that we didn't make love last night." The words echoed in her mind like a cruel joke. Disappointed? She wanted to scream, to run, to undo what had happened, but she couldn't. The weight of her mistake settled like lead in her stomach, pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe. She forced herself to smile, weak, shaky. "No, I understand. You were tired," she whispered. Daniel's lips curled into a relieved smile. "Good. I just didn't want you thinking I wasn't excited about last night. I want our first time to be special." Special. Angela swallowed the bile rising in her throat. There was nothing special about what had happened, because it hadn't been Daniel. Her mind reeled. What do I do? Confess and watch his heart shatter? Or stay silent and carry this secret to the grave? Her fingers trembled as she reached for the bedsheet, pulling it tightly around herself. "You okay?" Daniel asked, watching her closely. "You seem off." Angela forced another smile. Just tired, she lied. It was a long night. If only he knew. As the day passed, the guilt consumed her. Angela couldn't look at David. Every time she saw him, her stomach twisted with shame. Did he know? Did he remember? Would he say something? David avoided her gaze. He was quieter than usual, less playful, more distant. Had the realization hit him, too? Her mind raced with panic. What if he told Daniel? What if he let it slip in some drunken confession later? She needed to talk to him. But how? What could she even say? Hey, so, about last night, I thought you were my husband, and now I'm drowning in shame and regret. No, there was no good way to approach this, and yet she had no choice. Late that evening, Angela found David alone on the hotel balcony, staring out at the city lights. A cigarette dangled from his fingers, glowing softly in the dim light. She hesitated before stepping out. David! Her voice was barely a whisper. He stiffened. Slowly, he turned to face her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those same eyes she had stared into the night before, were filled with something she couldn't decipher. Regret? Guilt? Desire? The thought made her stomach twist. Angela, he said cautiously. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Last night, she started, her voice trembling. David exhaled slowly. Was a mistake. A painful lump formed in her throat. You knew, didn't you? He hesitated before nodding. Not at first, he admitted. We were both drunk. But after, when I left the room, I sobered up, and I realized, his jaw tightened. I realized I had just slept with my brother's wife. Angela flinched at the words. Her, Daniel's wife. Guilt surged through her like a tidal wave. Does he know? She asked, barely able to breathe. David's eyes darkened. No, his voice was firm. And he never will. Angela let out a shaky breath. So we pretend it never happened? David took a long drag of his cigarette before exhaling slowly. What choice do we have? The words felt like chains tightening around her. What choice did she have? She wanted to confess, to be honest with Daniel. But would he ever forgive her? Would he ever look at her the same way? Would their marriage survive? Or would it all crumble right here before it had even begun? Angela stared at David, her heart pounding. Could they really bury this secret? Could she live with this? Or was this the beginning of a truth that would destroy them all? Angela tried to move on. She told herself it was just a mistake, a drunken accident, a moment that would never happen again. And for a while she believed it. But then came the night she finally made love to Daniel. Daniel was gentle, loving, worshiping her body in a way that should have made her feel complete. Their bodies moved in sync, their moans filling the room as he whispered her name like a prayer. But something was missing. As much as she tried to lose herself in the moment, something dark and twisted crept into her mind. It wasn't the same. Her body responded to Daniel, but her soul craved the heat, the hunger, the uncontrollable desire she had felt with David. The way David had devoured her, the rawness, the recklessness. With Daniel, it was slow, soft, and sweet. With David, it had been fire, a forbidden, uncontrollable flame that had burned her to her very core. And now she wanted more. Angela tried to fight it. She convinced herself she was crazy. How could I want this? How could I betray my husband? Again, she avoided David as much as possible. But the tension between them became unbearable. Every stolen glance, every accidental touch, every moment alone where their eyes lingered too long. She could feel it. David could feel it. The pull. It was a dangerous game, and Angela was losing. It happened 3 weeks after the wedding. Angela was home alone while Daniel was away on a work trip. She had tried to distract herself, but the loneliness gnawed at her. And then, as if fate had conspired against her, David showed up. He claimed he was there to check on her, that Daniel had asked him to drop by. But the moment their eyes met, they both knew the truth. Neither of them should have been there. Neither of them should have wanted this. And yet, before she could stop herself, she was in his arms, lips crashing, hands clawing, clothes tearing. There was no drunken haze to blame this time, no mistake, no confusion, just pure, unfiltered desire. From that night on, Angela couldn't stop. She became addicted to the thrill, the danger, the wrongness of it all. David was the forbidden fruit, and she had taken a bite she could never undo. They found moments, stolen time when Daniel was away, when no one was watching. Secret hotel rooms, late-night meetings, silent touches when no one else was looking. Angela told herself she would stop, but she never did. David was her deepest sin, and she was no longer looking for redemption. The question is, how long can they keep this secret before it destroys them all? And what will happen when Daniel starts to suspect? Angela was in too deep. The thrill of secrecy, the intoxication of desire, the fire in David's touch. She told herself it was harmless. No one would ever know. But secrets always have a way of surfacing. And the price of her forbidden passion was about to be higher than she ever imagined. Angela thought she was careful. She erased texts. She cleared her call logs. She chose places where no one would recognize them. But lust makes people reckless. One night, while Daniel was asleep, her phone buzzed. A message from David. "I can't stop thinking about you." Angela's heart pounded. She glanced at Daniel, his slow, steady breathing signaling he was still deep in sleep. But paranoia crept in. Had he heard? Had he seen? She quickly deleted the message and turned off her phone. But that night, she couldn't sleep. She had ignored the truth for too long. This wasn't just an affair anymore. It was an addiction. And like all addictions, it would eventually destroy her. The risk heightened everything. The stolen moments, the whispered touches. But the more they indulged, the more reckless they became. One evening, as Angela was leaving a hotel after another unforgettable night with David, she froze. Across the street, standing in the dim glow of a streetlight, was Daniel. He hadn't seen them together, but he had seen her, leaving a hotel, alone, her breath caught in her throat. She forced a smile and waved as she walked toward him, her mind racing for an excuse. "You're here?" she asked, forcing surprise into her voice. "I had a meeting nearby," Daniel said, studying her face. "What about you?" Her palms felt sweaty. Lunch with a friend. She just left." Daniel nodded, but something flickered in his eyes. Doubt. Suspicion. She wasn't sure if he believed her, but the seed had been planted, and suspicion only grows. Angela tried to be more careful, but David wasn't as disciplined. One night, during a casual family dinner, Daniel made a joke about how Angela never drinks tequila. Angela laughed. "You know I hate tequila." But across the table, David smirked. "That's not what you said last weekend," he teased, sipping his drink. The room went silent. Angela felt the blood drain from her face. David realized his mistake too late. Daniel's eyes snapped to Angela. "Last weekend," Daniel repeated slowly. "I thought you were home?" Angela's mind raced. How could David be so careless? "Oh, he's just joking." She forced a laugh, squeezing David's knee under the table. A silent warning. "You know how he is." But Daniel wasn't laughing. And Angela knew. That was the moment the cracks in their perfect life began to show. The paranoia grew. Daniel started asking more questions. Angela noticed him watching her phone more. One night, she woke up to find him scrolling through her messages. But she had already deleted everything. Still, his behavior changed. He became distant, less affectionate, like a man trying to solve a puzzle he wasn't even sure existed. Angela tried to act normal, but the guilt was suffocating. And then, the unthinkable happened. She missed her period. First, she brushed it off. Stress, anxiety, it had to be. But as the days passed, dread settled in her bones. One afternoon, alone in the bathroom, she held the pregnancy test in her shaking hands. Positive. Angela's breath caught in her throat. Her mind spiraled. Daniel, David, who was the father? A cold wave of terror washed over her. This was no longer just a secret affair. This was a ticking time bomb. And when the truth finally came out, it would destroy everything. Angela's world was crumbling. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom sink, mocking her. Her hands trembled as she thought about the consequences. She needed to act fast. She needed to make sure no one ever found out the truth. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and hers was about to explode in the most catastrophic way. Daniel was changing. He was distant, cold, watching Angela like a man who knew something was wrong but couldn't yet prove it. One evening, as they sat on the couch, he suddenly asked, "Angela, do you love me?" The question caught her off guard. She forced a smile. "Of course I do. Why would you even ask that?" He studied her for a moment. "No reason," he said, but his eyes held something dark, something unreadable. Angela knew then. He suspected. And he wasn't going to stop until he had proof. David, reckless as always, couldn't stay away. He wanted her. He needed her. One night, while Daniel was out of town, David came over. It was supposed to be a quick visit, a few stolen kisses and nothing more, but passion took over. They lost themselves in each other, lips hungry, bodies desperate. Neither of them heard the front door open. Neither of them saw the shadow standing at the doorway. Not until, "What the fuck is this?" Angela gasped, her heart stopping. David jumped up, grabbing a bedsheet, but it was too late. Daniel stood there, his fists clenched, his face twisted in pure rage. Angela had never seen him like this before. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, Daniel lunged at David. The room exploded into chaos. Fists flew. Furniture crashed. Angela screamed. Daniel grabbed David by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "You were supposed to be my brother," he roared, his voice shaking with betrayal. David fought back, pushing Daniel off. "Angela wanted this just as much as I did." David spat. Angela froze. David's words hung in the air, heavy and damning. Daniel turned to her, his face dark with fury. His voice came out low and dangerous. "Is that true?" Angela's throat went dry. She opened her mouth to speak, but then Daniel's gaze dropped. His eyes locked on the pregnancy test sitting on the dresser. The room went dead silent. His voice was barely a whisper. "Is it mine?" Angela felt her stomach drop. Tears welled in her eyes, but she had no answer, because she didn't know. Daniel took a step back, his entire body trembling. Then he did something Angela never expected. He laughed, a dark, broken laugh that sent shivers down her spine. "You have no idea, do you?" he whispered, shaking his head. "You don't even know whose baby that is." Angela tried to reach for him. "Daniel, please." But he stepped away, his face cold. "This marriage is over." Then he turned and walked out the door. Angela fell to her knees. She had lost everything. And the worst part? She deserved it. Days passed. Daniel moved out. Angela tried to reach him, but he ignored her. Then one morning she woke up to the ultimate betrayal. A message from Daniel. A link. Her heart pounded as she clicked it. A video started playing. Security camera footage from the night she and David were in the hotel. The same night Daniel had seen her leaving. He had found proof. And now, he had sent it to their entire family. Angela's world collapsed. There was no hiding, no excuses. Everyone knew. Her reputation was in ruins. Her marriage was destroyed. And worst of all, Daniel wasn't coming back. Angela sat in the darkness of her bedroom, staring at the pregnancy test one last time. Her phone buzzed. A message from David. "Are you okay?" She stared at the screen. She had lost Daniel. But had she also lost David? And what about the baby? Was this really the end? Or was there more chaos to come? Angela had lost everything. Her husband, her dignity, her future. And now, as she stared at the DNA test results in her trembling hands, she realized she had lost the last sliver of hope she had left. The baby wasn't Daniel's. It was David's. Her stomach twisted with nausea. She had clung to the tiny possibility that the child might still be Daniel's, that maybe, just maybe, fate would show her mercy. But fate wasn't kind. Fate was a cruel mistress who had handed her the ugliest consequence of her mistakes. And now, she was truly alone. Angela sat across from Daniel in a quiet cafe, clutching the DNA results. Her heart pounded as she pushed the paper toward him. Daniel didn't touch it. He just stared at her, expressionless. "It's David's," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes. Something dark. Something she couldn't quite read. But when he finally spoke, his words hit her like a knife to the heart. "I don't care." Angela's breath caught. "But, you think this changes anything?" His voice was eerily calm. "It only confirms what I already knew." She swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I know I hurt you, but..." Daniel let out a cold laugh, shaking his head. "Sorry?" He leaned forward, his eyes piercing into hers. "You didn't just hurt me, Angela. You destroyed me. You destroyed my trust, my family, my relationship with my own brother." She blinked back tears. "I never wanted to ruin everything," she whispered. "But you did," he shot back. "And you can never undo it." Silence hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Angela hesitated. What about the baby?" For the first time, Daniel's face softened, and for a moment she thought she saw regret. But then he shook his head. "That's David's child, not mine." He stood up, sliding his wedding ring off his finger and placing it on the table. "This is the last time we ever talk, Angela." And with that, he walked away. Angela didn't call after him, because she knew she had lost Daniel forever. David was useless. She had hoped, desperately, that at least he would step up, that maybe, just maybe, they could make things work. But David had no intention of taking responsibility. When she told him about the DNA results, he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Damn," he muttered. "That's crazy." Angela clenched her fists. "That's all you have to say?" He shrugged. "I mean, what do you expect, Angela? I never planned for this. I'm not ready to be a father." Her stomach twisted. "So what? You're just going to walk away?" David sighed. "Look, I'll send money sometimes, all right? But I can't be tied down with a kid right now." Angela's breath caught in her throat. "Wow," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "I ruined my entire life for you, and this is what I get." David avoided her gaze. "I never asked you to." The words stung more than a slap. She had betrayed her husband, destroyed a marriage, and torn a family apart. For this, a selfish man who didn't love her. A man who wouldn't even acknowledge their child. A man who had never been worth losing Daniel over. Angela felt the final, crushing weight of regret settle over her. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. A year later, Angela sat in her small apartment, rocking her baby boy to sleep. She had named him Nathaniel, a name she had once dreamed of giving Daniel's child. But Nathaniel wasn't Daniel's. He was David's, and David barely even called. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text message from an old friend. "Did you hear? Daniel got married again." Angela's throat tightened. She clicked on the link attached to the message. A wedding photo popped up on her screen. Daniel stood beside his new wife, her replacement, smiling, genuinely happy. Angela felt tears sting her eyes. That could have been her. That should have been her. But she had destroyed it all. And now Daniel had moved on, found love again. He had rebuilt his life, while she was nothing but a painful memory he had erased, a mistake he would never forgive. Angela stared at her sleeping son, running a gentle hand over his soft curls. She had no one to blame but herself. She had gambled her happiness for forbidden pleasure, and she had lost everything. The biggest punishment, living with the regret every single day. Because some mistakes are unforgivable. David had always been reckless, selfish, irresponsible, and for a long time it seemed like he had escaped the consequences of his betrayal. But karma had a way of finding those who deserved it, and when it came for David, came with full force. At first, life went on as usual for David. He spent his nights at clubs, drinking, partying, and chasing women. He barely checked in on Angela and their son. Whenever she called, he either ignored her or gave half-hearted promises. "I'll send money next week. I'm just busy right now. Why are you always stressing me?" Angela had long stopped expecting anything from him. She had made peace with being a single mother. But what neither of them saw coming was David's downfall. David had always lived fast, drinking, gambling, making shady deals. He had gotten away with it for years. But one night his luck ran out. He owed money, serious money, to dangerous people, a debt he had no way of paying. And they weren't the kind of men who sent polite reminders. They wanted their money, or they wanted blood. Angela was feeding Nathaniel when her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated before picking up. "Hello." A deep, unfamiliar voice came through the line. "You're David's baby mama, right?" Angela's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. "Tell David we're tired of waiting. If he doesn't pay up, he won't have to worry about money ever again. Because he won't be alive to spend it." The call ended. Angela's hands trembled as she gripped the phone. David was in serious trouble, and the only person who could help was the one man who never wanted to hear his name again. Angela stood outside Daniel's house, clutching Nathaniel in her arms. Her heart pounded as she knocked. The door opened. Daniel stood there. His face hardened the moment he saw her. "What do you want?" Angela swallowed her pride. "I need your help." Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "My help?" he repeated. "You must be joking." She took a shaky breath. "It's David," she said. "He's in danger." Daniel's expression didn't change. "And?" Angela's eyes widened. "He could die, Daniel." Daniel crossed his arms. "So?" Angela flinched. How had it come to this? Two brothers who were once inseparable, now enemies. "You don't mean that," she whispered. Daniel's jaw clenched. "David made his choices," he said coldly. "And now he has to face the consequences." Tears filled Angela's eyes. "But he's your brother." Daniel's gaze was icy. "He stopped being my brother the moment he betrayed me." Angela had never felt so helpless. She had come here desperate. But Daniel wasn't the man she used to know. He had changed. And in that moment she realized, some wounds never heal. Days passed. Angela never heard from David again. Then one evening she saw the news. A man found badly beaten in a back alley, left for dead. Angela's blood ran cold when she saw his face. It was David, alive but barely. He was rushed to the hospital, his body covered in bruises, his jaw wired shut, his arm broken in 3 places. When Angela visited him, he barely acknowledged her. His eyes were hollow. The once charming David was now a broken man. Angela sat beside him, holding Nathaniel's tiny hand. "He needs you, David," she said softly. David turned his head slowly, looking at his son for the first time in months. A single tear rolled down his cheek, but he said nothing. Angela sighed, realizing the truth. David had lost. His betrayal had cost him everything. His brother, his pride, his future, and now he had nothing left. Angela saw Daniel one last time. She met him outside his office, holding Nathaniel in her arms. Daniel glanced at the child, his nephew, but showed no emotion. Angela took a deep breath. "I know you'll never forgive me," she said. Daniel didn't respond. "But I just wanted to say, I regret everything." Silence. Then, Daniel finally spoke. "I regret knowing you." Angela's breath caught. Daniel looked her in the eyes, his expression unreadable. "And I regret ever calling David my brother." With that, he walked away. And this time, Angela knew he wasn't coming back. David sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, a cigarette burning between his fingers. The bruises from his last beating had healed, but the scars remained, both on his body and in his soul. He had lost everything. His brother, his dignity, his future, and now he was a wanted man. The debt collectors weren't done with him. They had let him live last time, but this time they wouldn't be so kind. David knew he had only 2 choices, run or die, but there was one thing keeping him from leaving, one unfinished business. He needed to see Angela. Angela was getting ready for bed when she heard the knock. It was late, too late for visitors. A chill ran down her spine. She hesitated before opening the door. David stood there, looking haunted, his eyes sunken, his body tense. "David?" she whispered. "I need to talk," he said. Angela glanced back at Nathaniel, who was already asleep in his room. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. David ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "I messed up," he admitted. Angela crossed her arms. "What else is new?" David let out a bitter chuckle. "This time it's different," he said. "They're coming for me, and I don't think I'll make it out." Angela's stomach twisted. "David, I just need to know," he interrupted. "Was I ever good enough for you?" Angela's heart clenched. She wanted to lie, to tell him that he mattered, that despite everything, she had once loved him. But the truth was, he had never been enough. And now it was too late. She swallowed hard. "You should leave, David," she whispered, "before it's really too late." David nodded slowly. "I just wanted to see you. And Nathaniel." One last time. Angela's eyes burned, but she said nothing, because deep down she knew this was goodbye. David walked through the dark streets, his hands in his pockets. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. The city felt colder than ever. Then, a car slowed behind him. David's pulse quickened. He didn't have to turn around to know who it was. His time had run out. The doors opened. 2 men stepped out. David exhaled, forcing a smirk. "Took you long enough," he muttered. The first punch came fast, hard against his gut. David doubled over, gasping for breath. The second man grabbed him by the collar, shoving him against the alley wall. "Where's the money, David?" David laughed, blood trickling from his lips. "You already know the answer to that." The man sighed. "That's what I thought." The cold steel of a gun pressed against David's forehead. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid. He had spent years running from consequences. But tonight, there was no escape. The last thing he heard was the sound of the trigger pulling. Bang. And then, darkness. The news spread fast. A body found in an alley. A man shot execution style. Angela's heart shattered when she heard the name. David. She sank to the floor, sobbing. He had made so many mistakes, hurt so many people. But in the end, he didn't deserve to die like this. Nathaniel would never know his real father. And the worst part? Daniel never even got the chance to forgive him. Angela stood outside Daniel's office, clutching Nathaniel in her arms. She hadn't spoken to him in months, but he needed to know. She knocked once. Daniel opened the door, his expression cold. "What do you want?" Angela took a shaky breath. "It's David," she whispered. "He's dead." Silence. Daniel's face remained unreadable. Then he nodded. "Good." Angela gasped. "Daniel." He cut her off. "He chose his path," he said simply, "and it led him here." Angela stared at him, disbelief in her eyes. "You don't even care?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "I cared once, and he threw it away." Angela shook her head. "He was your brother." Daniel's voice was ice cold when he answered. "No," he said. "He was just the wrong twin." With that, he closed the door. And this time, he never looked back.